It began like any other morning. The sun had just started painting the sleepy streets of Maple Ridge with gold and warmth, and the birds chirped as if they had no idea what was coming. Jamal Washington stood in the kitchen, dressed in his usual navy blue polo and tan khakis, pouring cereal into 2 small bowls while his daughter Kamira tried to tame her curls in the hallway mirror. Malik, his 7-year-old son, sat cross-legged on the floor by the fridge, mumbling superhero powers under his breath and pretending his spoon was a laser cannon. Jamal smiled to himself. These quiet morning rituals weren't glamorous, but to him, they were sacred, the daily armor he wore against a world that often didn't see him as human first. He packed the kids' lunches, checked the school folder for parent notices, and kissed his wife Amina on the cheek before grabbing the keys to their black Toyota. It was just another Tuesday. But evil doesn't always wear a siren. Sometimes, it hides behind routine. The drive to school was filled with chatter about spelling tests, recess, drama, and Malik's latest obsession with becoming the first flying engineer. Kamira teased him while adjusting her backpack straps, and Jamal laughed, soaking in every second. He never took these rides for granted. He'd grown up without them. No one drove him to school. No one asked about his day. He had promised himself that when he became a father, he'd rewrite the story, and he had, until that morning. As they turned onto Birch Avenue, just 3 blocks from the elementary school, Jamal saw flashing lights behind him. A patrol SUV. He didn't panic. He wasn't speeding. He wasn't swerving. He signaled, pulled over calmly, and turned down the music. Just protocol. Just another random stop. His heart skipped, but he smiled back at his kids. Just routine, he said. But even Kamira's 10-year-old eyes narrowed. She had seen the videos. She had seen the tears. 2 officers approached, both white, both already tense. The taller one barked out, "License and registration." Jamal nodded, his hands visible. Slow, calm. "It's in the glove compartment. I'm reaching now." But they didn't wait. Before Jamal could even unbuckle, the second officer yanked the door open, grabbing Jamal by the arm. Kamira screamed. Malik dropped his toy. Jamal's head hit the pavement with a thud as both officers forced him down, one knee on his back, the other shouting something about matching a suspect's description. "This car's been flagged. Don't move. Stop resisting." But Jamal hadn't resisted. He hadn't moved, only breathed. Barely. Ca. Myra opened the door and tried to run out, crying, "That's my dad. What are you doing?" But the officer barked at her to stay in the vehicle. Malik sat frozen, his eyes wide with terror, watching his father's face pressed to the concrete. Jamal didn't shout. He didn't fight. He just looked toward his daughter with an expression she would never forget, an expression that said, "I'm sorry you're seeing this." The neighbors peeked through curtains. A jogger paused, phone half-raised, unsure. The school crossing guard from down the block recognized Jamal. He waved every morning. She ran over shouting, "That's Mr. Washington. He's just a dad, dropping off his kids." But the officers ignored her. One slapped on cuffs. Tight. Jamal winced, but stayed still. The cold metal bit into his wrists like a verdict. "Suspect in a recent robbery," matches the description. That phrase again, like a ghost that followed every black man who dared to drive a nice car in a quiet neighborhood. Amina's phone rang 5 minutes later. A strange number. A mechanical voice. "This is the Maple Ridge Police Department. Your husband has been taken into custody." No explanation, no context. Just another sentence in a book they never chose to write. Back at the scene, Kamira sat holding Malik's hand, both shaking in the backseat of the car. The same car their father had washed every Saturday with care. The same car he used to teach Kamira how to check tire pressure and change oil. Now it felt like a crime scene. The crossing guard argued with the officers. "You've made a mistake," she shouted. "He's on the PTA, for God's sake." But they didn't care. They had the cuffs on. They had the box checked. And Jamal was in the back of the SUV, staring through the metal grate, lips clenched shut. At the station, the reality sunk in fast. No evidence, no weapon. The suspect was still at large. Jamal didn't match the height. The car wasn't even close to the one reported. It was all based on a vague description. Black, male, mid-30s, dark vehicle. That was it. That was all it took. Hours later, he was released with a quick, "Sorry for the inconvenience." No report filed, no paperwork. Just silence and stares. But something inside Jamal cracked. Not shattered, cracked. Like the first fracture in a dam that's held too much for too long. He picked up his phone. He scrolled past texts from Amina, missed calls from his daughter's school, voicemails from his mother, but he didn't answer. He sat in his car, hands on the wheel, and finally, quietly wept. Because this wasn't just about him, this wasn't even new. It was about how quickly the world could try to destroy a man who had done everything right, how his skin turned a father into a suspect, how his silence was mistaken for submission, but something else rose too, not just grief, fire, and he would carry that fire home, to his wife, to his children, to a city that still thought this could happen without consequence. This was the morning they tried to break Jamal Washington, but they didn't know who they were dealing with. The cell was small, but the silence inside it was massive. The kind that echoes not just off the walls, but through a man's bones. Jamal sat on the cold bench, elbows resting on his knees, wrists still red from the cuffs that had been too tight for far too long. No clock, no answers, just concrete, flickering lights, and the distant sound of metal clanging every time someone else was processed. His mind ran in circles, the image of Kamira crying in the car, Malik's small face pressed against the window, the officer's knee grinding into his back. But it wasn't just the physical pain that lingered, it was the humiliation, the kind of shame that didn't belong to him, yet clung to him like smoke from a fire he didn't start. They had treated him like a threat, like a name without a story, like a black man with no family, no love, no humanity. But Jamal Washington was not invisible, and today, he would not be silent. 3 hours passed, maybe more. No lawyer, no questions, no real charges, just a long wait behind a steel door, where justice didn't bother to knock. A young officer eventually slid a paper bag across the bench. Your wallet, your phone, you're free to go. That was it. No eye contact, no apology, not even a glance. Just paperwork being stuffed into a file cabinet somewhere, like it never happened. But it had, every second of it. Outside the station, the world continued spinning like nothing had shifted. The sky was clear, the parking lot smelled like hot tar, but Jamal stood still. He checked his phone. 36 missed calls, 12 texts from Amina, a voicemail from the school nurse. Kamira had broken down during math class. She couldn't stop crying, the nurse said gently. She said she watched her father get arrested. Jamal closed his eyes, his fists clenched, and then, he exhaled, slowly, fighting back the sting rising behind his eyes. Amina met him, at home. She didn't speak at first, just opened the door, hugged him tighter than she ever had, and let him breathe in the warmth of home again. They said it was a mix-up, she whispered, brushing his cheek. They said you matched the description, that phrase again, like a sickness. Kamira and Malik stood in the hallway behind her, both unsure if they should run into his arms, or keep their distance, afraid of what they had seen. Jamal dropped to his knees and held them both, heart breaking under the weight of their little arms wrapping around his neck. That night, the silence in the house was different. It wasn't peace. It was the sound of things never being the same again. Kamira barely ate. Malik kept asking, "Why'd they do that to you, Daddy?" And Jamal had no words to explain a world this cruel. Amina sat across the room, searching his face for answers he couldn't give. The news ran a segment about rising tensions in the city. Another black man accidentally detained, another face blurred out, another excuse. No names, no context. Just statistics, headlines, and anchors who smiled with perfect teeth, while the pain of families like theirs faded to commercial breaks. The next morning, Jamal tried to return to normal. He shaved, put on a button-up, packed the kids' lunches, again. But when he stepped into the school hallway to drop them off, every eye turned. Teachers paused mid-conversation. A parent nodded stiffly and turned away. Even the principal gave him a long, awkward look before forcing a smile. "We're glad you're okay," she said, tone unsure. But Jamal knew what she meant. "We saw what happened. We know what happened. But we won't talk about it." Silence, the system's favorite defense. That afternoon, a message came from HR at Jamal's job. "We'd like to schedule a conversation about your recent interaction with law enforcement." His stomach dropped. He worked in community outreach for a nonprofit. He'd never had a write-up, never been late. But now, his image, clean, professional, fatherly, was under quiet scrutiny. And still, no one asked why this happened. No one questioned the officers. No one sent a letter or showed up at his door. Because the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly how it was designed. Jamal sat on the porch that evening, hands trembling around a mug of untouched coffee, staring into the fading dusk. The children were inside watching a cartoon, trying, desperately, to forget. Amina folded laundry in the living room, pausing every few minutes to look out the window and check on him. But Jamal wasn't really sitting there. He was back on that pavement, face pressed to gravel, hearing his daughter scream, hearing his son fall silent in fear. That moment played again and again in his mind. He didn't cry, not anymore. Something colder had taken root, not hate, not rage. Something deeper, the quiet determination of a man who'd been pushed too far to keep pretending. The next day, he received a letter from Child Protective Services, a follow-up to the incident, because the children had been in the vehicle during his arrest. CPS was now required to perform a wellness check. A stranger would now decide if Jamal was a fit parent, all because of a mistake. That letter burned more than the handcuffs, more than the whispers, more than the humiliation, because it told him clearly, "We don't see you as a father. We see you as a risk." Amina cried when she read it. Jamal didn't. He folded it neatly and placed it on the dining table. Then he grabbed a notebook from the drawer, opened it to a clean page, and wrote at the top, "They tried to break me." Beneath it, he wrote the date of his arrest. Then every detail he could remember, the officers' names, their words, his own silence. He wrote until his hand cramped. Then he wrote some more, because if the system was going to bury him in silence, he would answer with truth, not just for himself, not just for his kids. but for every father who had ever been thrown against a wall for the crime of going to work. Every man cuffed in front of his family and told its just procedure. Every black man forced to explain to his children why the people in blue treat them like shadows instead of human beings. He knew this was bigger than one traffic stop, bigger than Maple Ridge. This was centuries old. But he wasn't afraid anymore. They had tried to shame him, cage him, quiet him, but they had forgotten something. They didn't arrest a criminal. They arrested a father. And now, that father was wide awake. It was the second Monday after the arrest when Jamal stepped into the HR office at his nonprofit, folder in hand, pressed slacks, and chin raised, not because he wasn't shaken, but because shaking now would only feed what they already assumed. The room smelled like weak coffee and disinfectant, and the woman sitting behind the desk, Susan from compliance, offered a tight, uncomfortable smile that didn't reach her eyes. "This is just a check-in," she said, gently gesturing to the chair across from her, but Jamal knew better. This wasn't a check-in, this was a scan, a test. "Are you angry? Are you a liability? Will you cause noise?" She asked about his well-being, her voice carefully avoiding any mention of the arrest. She danced around the words like they were hot coals. Public perception, donor sensitivity, optics. Jamal sat still, his back straight, hands folded neatly. He didn't flinch. When she finally asked, "Do you intend to take any legal action?" Jamal's answer was short, "Not sure yet." Her expression stiffened, as if that reply had cracked the glass she was sitting behind. When he left the building, a cold wind cut through his blazer. Not the kind you feel on your skin, the kind that settles deep in your soul. The world wasn't saying, "We're sorry." It was saying, "We hope you let this die quietly." But Jamal wasn't built for quiet anymore. Something had shifted. In him. Something permanent. That evening, back home, Amina stood by the sink, washing dishes, while Kamira helped Malik finish his homework. Jamal watched them for a while before pulling out the notebook again. He added more details, more truths. Then he typed it out. Every paragraph, every memory, the officer's words, the fear in his daughter's scream, the insult that had no name. He didn't dramatize, he didn't curse. He just told it the way it happened, raw, human, devastating. Then, he opened his email and sent it to someone he hadn't spoken to in years, Darnell Jones, an old college friend turned journalist. The response came fast. "Brah, this piece is fire. Raw, real. You want me to publish it?" "Yes," Jamal replied, "but no edits. Not one word. Done." By Thursday, the story was live on the local Pulse. Under the headline, "He was just a dad taking his kids to school. Then the police took his dignity." Within 48 hours, it had over 2 million views. The comment section was flooded. Some called Jamal brave, others wept, saying it mirrored their own trauma, and some predictably raged, called him a liar, a race baiter, claimed he must have done something. One message read, "If you people would stop acting like victims, this wouldn't happen." But Jamal didn't reply, because now he understood. They wanted him angry. But his power was in calm. In truth, in refusal to be erased. The next Sunday, their pastor invited Jamal to speak after service. A small moment, a big shift. Jamal stood before the congregation, voice steady, and said, "I didn't come here to be a symbol. I came here because I want my kids to grow up in a world where their tears mean something, where fathers don't have to explain trauma over breakfast cereal." The crowd stood to their feet in silence, not applause, something deeper. Reverence. A local councilwoman called the next day. She had read the piece, wanted to meet. Jamal sat across from her in a coffee shop, watching her scribble notes while trying to hide the discomfort in her posture. She meant well, but even she said it. Maybe this isn't worth pursuing legally. Sometimes, it's better to move forward. That phrase struck Jamal harder than the gravel had. Better to move forward. As if stepping around your own public humiliation was a healthy coping strategy. As if ignoring your pain made you noble. Jamal looked her in the eyes and said, "If I let this go, what's the next father supposed to do when it happens to him?" She had no answer, just lowered her eyes and nodded. Weeks passed. Kamira started therapy. Malik stopped having nightmares. Amina held Jamal tighter now, not out of fear, but out of awe. She had always known her husband was strong, but now she saw the mountain in him, the man who could carry not just his pain, but the weight of a community slowly waking up. And still, the system waited, watched. Jamal's job remained quiet, supportive in appearance, distant in truth. No promotion talk, no internal investigation into how the police obtained his name. Even the officers who arrested him, not a single reprimand. They continued patrolling those same streets, one hand on the wheel, the other near their holsters. One afternoon, Jamal drove Kamira home from a piano recital. She was quiet, staring out the window, until she asked, "Do you think it'll happen again?" He gripped the wheel a little tighter. Then he looked at her in the rearview mirror and said, "I hope not. But if it does, I won't be silent. Not ever again." That night, he sat down and printed out his story, framed it, hung it in the hallway near the front door. Not for visitors. For his children, so they'd know, so they'd remember. Not the pain, but the fight that followed. Later that week, a stranger stopped him at the grocery store. A young black man in a hoodie, maybe 22, nodded and said, "You wrote that piece, right? I just want you to know. It gave me courage, man. My dad went through the same thing, never spoke about it, but you said it for all of us." Jamal nodded, swallowed the lump in his throat, and replied, "Then I did what I was supposed to." The morning was quiet in the Washington household, but the stillness wasn't peace, it was purpose. Jamal sat at the dining table with a single sheet of paper in front of him, an open laptop to his right, and a slow cup of black coffee going cold to his left. Amina moved silently behind him, refolding laundry that didn't need folding. Her anxiety measured in how often she glanced at him but said nothing. On the kitchen counter were colored drawings from Kamira and Malik, a family of 4 smiling under a giant sun. Stick figures, bright colors, innocence undisturbed. Jamal stared at those drawings for a long time. Then he picked up his pen. The letter wasn't meant to go viral. It wasn't written for television, for politicians, or for applause. It was written because truth has a temperature and silence makes it boil. Jamal didn't write it as a victim. He wrote it as a father who had been cornered, as a man who had seen the thin line between dignity and disaster, and as someone who refused to disappear. The words didn't come fast. They came like bricks, one at a time, heavy and precise. He wrote about the feeling of his children watching him be cuffed like a criminal. He wrote about the face of the officer who didn't see a father, only a profile. He wrote about the silence afterward, the coldness of the system, the isolation at work, the way strangers looked at him like he was radioactive. He didn't ask for revenge. He asked for recognition. See me, hear me, tell the truth by midnight. Amina sat across from him with tears lining her eyes. "You're really going to send this?" she asked. Jamal nodded, voice steady. "If not me, who?" He clicked send CCD to the mayor's office. Local newsrooms, the school board, city council members, and the Community Coalition for Justice. Then he closed the laptop and sat back, exhaling as if he had just unloaded a lifetime of holding back. The next day, nothing happened. No calls, no emails, just normalcy, pretending to be real. But by the third day, everything changed. The letter had been picked up by the Civic Times, the city's most widely read blog. From there, it caught fire. Local radio shows quoted it. Churches shared it in bulletins. Teachers printed it and placed it on their desks. The city's Facebook pages buzzed with comments. One post read, "He put into words what we all feel but can't explain." Another said, "I used to think these stories were exaggerated. I don't anymore." But not all the responses were kind. Some were venomous. One email came to Jamal's inbox that read, "Go back to being silent. You're lucky they didn't. Shoot." Another said, "Stop dividing this city. You were just pulled over. Get over it." Jamal read them all, not because he enjoyed the hate, but because every sentence proved why he had to speak in the first place. A week later, a protest formed outside City Hall, not because Jamal asked for it, but because his letter gave people permission to. Field students held signs with words from his letter. Mothers stood with strollers holding up banners that read, "Our fathers deserve to come home." Even Kamara's school art teachers showed up, quietly marching with a laminated copy of the drawing Kamara had made after the arrest, a tear falling from a little girl's cartoon eye. The media couldn't ignore it, and they tried to, but silence doesn't stand a chance when a city finds its voice. Soon, news vans parked outside Jamal's home. One by one, they asked for interviews. Jamal declined most, but when the Morning Light, a national platform known for long-form journalism, requested to sit down with him in his home, he agreed. He didn't dress up, he wore a simple gray sweater. Amina sat next to him. The interviewer asked, "What do you want the country to understand?" Jamal replied, "That what happened to me isn't rare. What's rare is that I had a platform to tell it. Most don't." The segment aired on a Sunday evening, and suddenly Jamal's face wasn't just known in Maple Ridge. It was known across the country. Donations started pouring into a local fatherhood initiative in Jamal's name. Parents wrote letters. A retired judge reached out privately and confessed, "I've seen this for years. I'm sorry I never said anything." A group of law students from a nearby university offered to assist in a civil case pro bono. And still not a single word from the police department. Not an apology, not an acknowledgement. Just stone silence, broken only by the city's growing unrest. But Jamal never asked for pity. He asked for reform. And one night, sitting at the kitchen table with Amina, he told her his next step. "I want to create something for fathers who've been through this. I want them to know they're not alone." Amina looked at him, a soft smile forming. "Then, we'll build it." They called it the Father's Fire, a coalition focused on storytelling, healing, and legal resources for men who had suffered public humiliation by law enforcement. The name wasn't about anger. It was about resilience. The fire they carried not in rage, but in love. Word spread fast. Men began showing up. Some brought stories, others brought silence, unsure how to speak but desperate to feel heard. Jamal listened to them all, and every time, he told them, "You're not broken. You were targeted, but you're still standing. That means something." One afternoon, a tall, quiet man named Leon approached him after a meeting. He had been wrongfully arrested in front of his daughter at a mall. Same story, different city. He'd never told anyone. Jamal hugged him. No words. Just brotherhood. Just truth. Finally allowed to breathe. And still, the city pushed back. Some officials called the movement divisive. Others claimed it was politically motivated. But the community didn't care, because it wasn't politics that put knees on their backs. It was the silence that followed. And Jamal had broken that silence with a letter they couldn't erase. One night, Kamira asked if she could speak at her school assembly. She stood in front of hundreds of students and said, "My dad was arrested in front of me. I couldn't breathe. But now I see him standing tall, helping others, and I want to be like that." The crowd erupted. Teachers wiped tears. And somewhere in the back row, Jamal stood quietly, hands folded, pride in his chest so big it hurt. They tried to break him, but he wrote instead. And with one letter, he turned pain into power. City Hall had always been a place Jamal passed by, never entered. A place where decisions were made about people like him, but never with people like him. The towering limestone steps, the rigid glass doors, the polished marble inside, it all spoke of a world insulated from the voices it most needed to hear. But this time, he wasn't walking past. He was walking in. The hearing had been forced. Too many voices, too many articles, too much footage. The mayor, under pressure from both protesters and donors, called for a special city council forum on community, safety, and equity. A phrase dressed in bureaucracy, but everyone knew what it was about. They knew who it was about. Jamal wasn't just invited, he was expected. That morning, Amina tied his tie. Navy blue strong, calming. He wore a white shirt, rolled at the cuffs, and walked in without a single note in his hand. "You don't need a speech," Amina had told him. "You've been living it." When Jamal arrived at City Hall, the plaza was already full. Protesters stood shoulder to shoulder with community elders, young fathers, mothers with babies, and even local clergy. One older black man touched Jamal's arm as he passed and whispered, "We've waited a long time for someone like you to speak in that room." Inside, the council chamber buzzed with cameras and tension. On one side sat officials in suits, guarded and stiff. On the other, an open mic, waiting. Jamal waited silently, watching the room. He listened as others spoke, professors with data, lawyers with policy briefs, activists with stories. But when his name was called, the air shifted. Even the camera crews sat taller. Jamal walked to the microphone. No papers, no theatrics, just presence. "I'm not here as a politician. I'm here as a father who almost lost his voice in front of his kids." His voice was steady. "I was pulled over in my own neighborhood, with my children in the back seat. For no crime other than existing in a place someone thought I didn't belong. But this isn't just about me. It's about the pattern, the quiet permission our city has given to fear black fatherhood." Some council members glanced down. Others looked uncomfortable, but Jamal didn't flinch. "You asked for solutions. Here's one. Start seeing us as human. Start teaching your officers to de-escalate without domination. Start listening to the stories you pretend are isolated, because they're not. They're everywhere. And if you don't change this system, you're telling our kids that dignity is optional, and that's a lie." A few in the audience stood, then more. Applause broke the tension, and for a moment, City Hall sounded like it belonged to the people. But Jamal didn't wait for approval. He nodded once and walked back to his seat beside Amina, who held his hand so tightly he could feel her pulse in his palm. Later, outside, reporters swarmed. "Do you think the city will actually change?" one asked. Jamal looked straight into the camera and said, "That depends. Are they more afraid of justice or of admitting they were wrong?" That soundbite went viral. But behind the headlines, the system creaked, slowly, unwillingly. The police department issued a press release, bland and evasive. "We are reviewing our procedures to ensure community trust." No apology, no names, just PR. But what they didn't expect was how far the movement had spread. Teachers began holding courage circles where students could speak openly about experiences with profiling. A local theater company adapted Jamal's letter into a live performance. Churches hosted fatherhood and fear panels, attended by hundreds, and across city departments, quiet employees began leaking internal emails, exposing patterns of discipline, or the lack of it, when officers abused power. A week later, a young city councilwoman, Latinx and new to office, introduced a resolution called the Jamal Washington Dignity Act. It called for public transparency in profiling cases, required every officer to undergo trauma-informed training, and, most boldly, opened a public review board composed of citizens, not police. The establishment fought it, but the streets didn't stay silent. One night, a candlelight vigil filled the plaza in front of City Hall. Hundreds came, no slogans, just light. At the center stood Jamal, not speaking, just holding Kamira's hand. A news anchor whispered, "We've never seen anything like this here." And then came the unexpected. One of the officers involved in Jamal's arrest, not the one who initiated it, but the one who stood by and said nothing, reached out privately. His name was Officer Cruz. He was shaken. "I froze," he told Jamal, voice cracking. "I knew it was wrong. I was afraid to speak up." Jamal didn't respond with anger. He responded with a question. "Are you still afraid?" Cruz asked if he could testify at the next council hearing. He did, and what he said exploded through the city. We are trained to see threat first, and when the threat has a black face, we stop questioning it. That has to change. I should have spoken up that night. I didn't, and I regret it. The room fell into stunned silence. Amina wept quietly, and Jamal, he didn't move. His eyes locked on Cruz, not in hatred, but in clarity. Accountability isn't revenge. It's the beginning of healing. From that moment, the city couldn't go back. The resolution passed. Narrowly, but it passed. The mayor begrudgingly signed it, and on that same day, Jamal received a letter, official, sealed, from the department. Inside Fani was an apology. Not from the PR team, from the new police chief herself. Recently appointed, you should never have been treated the way you were, and your children should never have had to see it. We are changing, because your voice demanded it. He read it aloud to his family that evening, and for the first time in months, the dinner table felt like home again, not a war room. Long after the protests quieted, and the flash of headlines began to fade, the true battle began not in the streets, but in the silence that follows public fury. For Jamal, the fight never ended at City Hall. Change on paper was a start, but justice lived in what people chose to do when no one was watching. Weeks passed, then months. The law had shifted, but the neighborhood still held its breath every time a patrol car slowed near a black home. Jamal saw it in the way fathers still walked their kids with eyes over their shoulder, the way store owners kept their receipts ready like shields. The fear hadn't vanished. It had only learned how to hide better, but something else was rising. In the background, Amina had an idea foundation, built not on charity, but on power. She and Jamal called it Restored Ground. Its mission was simple: protect black families through legal aid, storytelling, and direct community defense. They didn't ask for grants, they asked for accountability. Within 6 months, Restored Ground had trained 120 black youth in civic advocacy, funded 3 families to challenge profiling cases in court, and launched a digital archive collecting stories like Jamal's raw, honest, and undeniable. One of those stories went viral. A young boy named Zion, only 13, who filmed his own father being harassed in a park for looking out of place. His voice trembled on the footage. "Why are you yelling at my dad? He didn't do nothing." That moment hit Jamal harder than his own experience had. He saw himself in that boy. His own son, Kamau, was now 11, taller, quieter, and asking bigger questions. "Dad," Kamau said, one evening, "why do they always think we're a threat?" Jamal didn't have an easy answer, but he gave the only honest one. Because they haven't been taught to see our light, only our shadow. That's why we fight to make them see. And Kamo nodded. "I want to help too." So he did. Kamo and Kamira began speaking at schools, telling their story from their point of view. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't filtered. And that was why it struck like lightning. Teachers wept. Other children came forward with stories of their own. One girl, just 10, shared how her father was taken from their driveway after a neighbor mistook him for a thief. Another boy, shy and small, whispered how he was scared to wear a hoodie outside. Their stories stitched a tapestry of truth. The city could no longer ignore it. Soon, universities reached out to Jamal, law schools, criminal justice reform groups, even federal observers. But he kept his ground. "I'm not your keynote. I'm a father who got tired of begging to be seen. You want change? Amplify the unheard. Don't just applaud me, build with me." The fire kept spreading. Then came the invitation from the White House. A policy roundtable on policing equity. Only 10 invitees. Jamal was one. He sat across from senior advisors, senators, and law enforcement leaders. Some rolled their eyes quietly, expecting another emotional appeal. But Jamal arrived not just with words, but with data, cases, names, video, and action plans. He wasn't there to speak about pain. He was there to leverage it. He ended his talk with this: "You ask how to rebuild trust. That's the wrong question. Black communities aren't looking to trust you. They're looking for systems that don't require faith to survive. We want structures where dignity is guaranteed, not requested." Silence. Then one of the senators asked, "Do you believe this system can be saved?" Jamal leaned forward, eyes steady. "Not as it is, but I believe in the people you're afraid to empower, and that's where the real saving starts." That soundbite lit a new fire. Back home, the foundation expanded. A local tech company partnered to build an app that recorded racial incidents in real-time, logging location, officer ID, and video to a secure server. Schools began revising their curriculum, integrating Restored Ground's story archive into classrooms. One teacher said, "For the first time, our black students feel seen." Jamal didn't become a politician. He didn't run for office. He didn't want power through a title. He wanted it through transformation. But even in this moment of growing recognition, scars remained. Late one night, while walking home from a fundraiser, Jamal saw 2 patrol cars stopped down the street. A young black teen was against the hood. No backup, no crowd. Just him and them. Jamal walked faster. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, calmly but firmly. One officer turned. "Step back, sir. This doesn't concern you." Jamal pulled out his phone, silently filming. "If there's no problem, Then there's no reason I can't observe. The officers hesitated. One looked directly at Jamal, then blinked in recognition. You're that guy, right? From the hearings? Jamal didn't answer, just kept filming. They let the teen go moments later. No ticket, no explanation. The boy, may be 16, looked at Jamal, stunned. Man, thank you. Jamal placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Nah, thank you. You reminded me why we keep going. And in that quiet street, far from microphones and applause, Jamal understood something deeper than any resolution, any council vote, any apology letter. The real change wasn't in law. It was in resistance becoming inheritance. The fire they tried to extinguish in him now lived in others. In his son, in his daughter, in the silence that now had witnesses. And as Jamal walked home under the streetlights, he didn't feel broken. He felt unbreakable.